Welcome to the third video in the Beowulf excerpt lecture series for this class. As for today's pun, we have, I'm sorry, I can't be your Valentine. I'm taken. From the Taken movies. Yep. Okay. Previously on Days of Our Beowulf, as the Beowulf turns, the young and the Beowulfless. Beowulf swam the open seas for 5 days against Breca of the Brondings. In the cold, in armor, with a sword, slapping down whales, but eventually fighting sea serpents. 9 of them. And he says, like his battle with the mighty sea serpents, he will kill the Grendel monster today. We'll see how that goes. Make sure you have a look at your study guide before we begin. Why does Beowulf not use weapons against Grendel, and what virtues does he show? Yeah, I kind of snuck 2 questions in there, but, you know, kind of some overlap with the first question if you're paying attention. Virtues, reflecting one another, gotta have some overlap there. So let's go ahead and open the book, or PDF, as it may be. The box gives us a little recap here. As the epic begins, we are introduced to King Hrothgar, a revered and successful leader who has ruled the Danes for many years. He has recently built the mead hall, Heorot. I know the spelling's a little different, varies from translation to translation, to commemorate his many victories. As Hrothgar's men celebrate and enjoy life in Heorot, however, a monster called Grendel lurks in the empty swamps nearby, seething with resentment and hatred for humans. Eventually, Grendel attacks Heorot and mercilessly kills 30 of Hrothgar's men. This marks the beginning of Grendel's reign of terror over the Danes, which lasts for 12 years. Rescue finally comes in the form of a great warrior named Beowulf, who hails from the land of the Geats in Sweden. Beowulf hears of Hrothgar's troubles and decides to journey to Denmark with some of the strongest men to do battle with Grendel. Once he arrives, he meets Hrothgar and boasts of his numerous past achievements, like the sea serpents, which qualifies him to challenge Grendel. Beowulf then announces that he will fight the monster that night without weapons. A celebratory feast ensues. At its end, Beowulf and his men take the place of Hrothgar's followers and lie down to sleep in Heorot. Beowulf, however, is wakeful, eager to meet his enemy. He is not kept waiting long. So Beowulf boasts that he's going to fight without weapons, and he does this for multiple reasons. One, he claims that, the monster doesn't fight with weapons, so I have to be fair to the monster. He doesn't have weapons, I won't fight with weapons. Not the only reason, though. That's not exactly fair. The monster kills people and eats them all the time with his bare hands. His hands are practically deadly weapons. So Beowulf is doing this for the boast, the fame. It's impressive to kill a monster that's plagued the greatest warriors in the land for 12 years. More impressive to do it without weapons or armor. Now, the movie does this a little differently. If you've seen the recent film in the 2000s, he fights Grendel with no clothes at all. No armor and no clothes are not the same thing. He has clothes on in the book, like shirt, pants, just no armor, no chainmail, no breastplate, no sword. Slightly different. They did that in the film for the comedic effect. Makes it feel like a scene from Austin Powers or something. But anyway, back to the book. Out from the marsh, from the foot of misty hills and bogs, bearing God's hatred, Grendel came, hoping to kill anyone he could trap on his trip to high Heorot. He moved quickly through the cloudy night, up from his swampland, sliding silently toward the gold-shining hall. He had visited Hrothgar's home before. He knew the way. But never before, nor after that night, found Heorot defended so firmly, his reception so harsh. He journeyed forever joyless, straight to the door, then snapped it open, tore its iron fasteners with a touch, and rushed angrily over the threshold. So Grendel is so strong he can rip the doors of this hall off their hinges, and the bolts go flying. He strode quickly across the inlaid floor, snarling and fierce. His eyes gleamed in darkness, burned with a gruesome light. That will become a motif in later stories, monsters' eyes glowing like fire, or magically glowing in the darkness. Then he stopped, seeing the hall crowded with sleeping warriors, stuffed with rows of young soldiers resting together, and in his heart he laughed, relished the sight, intended to tear the life from those bodies. By morning, the monster's mind was hot with the thought of food and the feasting in his belly. But he would soon know. But fate that night intended Grendel to gnaw the broken bones of his last human supper. Notice it's very vivid here, the poetry of Grendel wanting to eat and chow down on and break the bones of his human food. But it also says fate has decreed this is going to be his last time eating food, especially human food. That kind of spoils the plot for us, I know, but this is a culture that believes in fate. Weird, W-Y-R-D, fate, destiny. They believe that it's going to happen like this, then it's fated to happen. So, spoiler, but they kind of believed in spoilers back then. They believed in fate. But the details can still be interesting, seeing how it happens. And honestly, you probably figured out that the hero wins in this story. That's kind of a given at this point. Let's see. Human eyes were watching his evil steps, waiting to see his swift, hard claws. Grendel snatched at the first geet he came to, ripped him apart, cut his body to bits with powerful jaws, drank the blood from his veins, and bolted him down, hands and feet. Death and Grendel's great teeth came together, snapping life shut. Then he stepped to another still body, clutched at Beowulf with his claws, grasped at a strong-hearted, wakeful sleeper, and was instantly seized himself, claws bent back as Beowulf leaned up on one arm. Notice here, Grendel grabs the first guy he comes to, not named here, but named later in the book as, name escapes me for a moment. I know this name. Hold on a moment. My brain just stopped. I'll think of it in a moment. But Honshu. Honshu is the name. Hondsciu. Honshu. In the movie, he's this bald guy that's always making the inappropriate comments. So in proper horror movie conventions, the guy that makes the inappropriate comments a lot is generally the first person to die. So yeah, that's an old convention apparently. He's killed first, eaten in vivid detail. And then Grendel goes to grab Beowulf, thinking, ooh, more free dinner for me. But Beowulf's only pretending to sleep. Keep sleeping with one eye open for the monster coming while they sleep. And when Grendel grabs Beowulf's arm with that firm monster grip, Beowulf reaches up and grabs him right back. And in that moment, Grendel knows fear because he feels just how strong Beowulf really is. And Grendel, the monster, is only brave when no one fights back or when no one can fight back. The moment he finds someone strong enough to face him, coward. He's afraid, he runs, he is getting out of there. So we'll see. That shepherd of evil, guardian of crime, those are kennings, by the way, knew at once that nowhere on earth had he met a man whose hands were harder. That doesn't mean they're callous. That means he's got really huge strength. His mind was flooded with fear, but nothing could take his talons and himself from that tight, hard grip. Grendel's one thought was to run from Beowulf, to flee back to his marsh and hide there. This was a different Heorot than the hall he had emptied, but Hygelac follower remembered his final boast, and, standing erect, stopped the monster's flight, fastened those claws in his fists till they cracked, clutched Grendel closer. Notice if you're looking for examples of Beowulf being strong, he's grabbing the monster with his bare hands so tightly that the monster's bones are cracking. That's pretty strong. The infamous killer fought for his freedom, wanting no flesh but retreat, desiring nothing but escape. His claws had been caught. He was trapped. That trip to Heorot was a miserable journey for the writhing monster. The high hall rang, the roof boards swayed, and Danes shook with terror. Down the aisles the battle swept, angry and wild. Heorot trembled wonderfully, built to withstand the blows. The struggling great bodies beating at its beautiful walls, shaped and fastened with iron inside and out. Artfully worked, the building stood firm. Its benches rattled, fell to the floor, gold-covered boards, grating, as Grendel and Beowulf battled across them. Hrothgar's wise men had fashioned Heorot to stand forever. Only fire they had planned could shatter with such skill had put together, swallow in hot flame such splendor of ivory and iron and wood. That might seem like an odd shift there. They go from describing how beautiful the building is, the setting where they're fighting, how strong it is, and then saying, oh, but I mean, fire could destroy Heorot, but oh well. You see, back then, this is the early Middle Ages, not the late Middle Ages, so castles, fortresses, keeps like Heorot were made of wood, not stone like the castles in the late Middle Ages. So fire was a huge problem, especially when the Viking clans attacked each other. Fire was a go-to method. If you've ever seen Robin Hood Men in Tights, at the beginning of the movie, they mock this. Every time they make a Robin Hood movie, they burn our village down. That kind of joke plays in here. I think of that every time I read this because Viking villages, the go-to wit method was fire. Moving on. The sounds changed. The Danes started in new terror, cowering in their beds as the terrible screams of the Almighty's enemy sang in the darkness. The horrible shrieks of pain and defeat, the tears torn out of Grendel's taut throat, Hell's captive caught in the arms of him who of all men on earth was the strongest. That mighty protector of men, meant to hold the monster till its life leapt out, knowing the fiend was of no use to anyone in Denmark. All of Beowulf's band had jumped from their beds, ancestral swords raised and ready, determined to protect their prince if they could. Just now the Danes, the Thanes that, the Geats that Beowulf brought with him are waking up to help. They must have been sleeping pretty deeply. Maybe they partied a little too much before the Beowulf fight. But now they're helping Beowulf, or at least trying to. Their courage was great, but it was all wasted. They could hack at Grendel from every side, trying to open a path for his evil soul, but their points could not hurt him. The sharpest and hardest iron could not scratch at his skin, for that sin-stained demon had bewitched all men's weapons, laid spells that blunted every mortal man's blade. So Grendel has magic. He entered a magical cheat code, the magical Konami code here, and made himself immune to human weapons. That's not to say anything about magical weapons, but human weapons he is immune to. Will never hurt him. And yet his time had come. The narrator assures us, don't worry, monster's still going to die, just not this way. His days were over, his death near. Down to hell would he go, swept groaning and helpless to the waiting hands of still worse fiends. Now he discovered, once the afflictor of men, tormentor of their days, what it meant to feud with Almighty God. Because Beowulf, though they probably worshipped Odin and Thor back then, is the chosen warrior of God in the story because the author is a monk. Grendel saw that his strength was deserting him. His claws bound fast, Higlac's brave follower tearing at his hands. The monster's hatred rose higher, but his power had gone. He twisted in pain, and the bleeding sinews deep in his shoulder snapped. Muscle and bone split and broke. So the poet here is describing in great detail the monster's arm pulling away from his body and splitting off. Graphic detail. Still poetry. The battle was over. Beowulf had been granted new glory. Grendel escaped, but wounded as he was, he would flee to his den, his miserable hole at the bottom of the marsh, only to die, to wait for the end of all his days. And after that bloody combat, the Danes laughed with delight. He who had come to them from across the sea, bold and strong-minded, had driven off, purged Heorot clean. He was happy. Now, with that night's fierce work, the Danes had been served as he boasted he'd serve them. Beowulf, prince of the Geats, had killed Grendel, ended the grief, sorrow, the suffering, forced on Hrothgar's helpless people by a bloodthirsty fiend. No Dane doubted the victory, for the proof, hanging high from the rafters where Beowulf had hung it, was the monster's arm, claw and shoulder and all. Notice that now there's something slightly more impressive than deer antlers on the wall of Heorot. Beowulf takes the arm, shoulder and all, as a trophy and mounts it on the wall so that everyone can see he killed the monster. There's proof right there. Now, you might think from modern monster movies, just the arm? He can't be dead. He's going to come back 2 or 3 times. But this isn't a modern monster movie. Here, this is actually good enough. Monster bleeds to death. He makes it home first, but still bleeds to death at home in the monster cave. And then in the morning, crowds surrounded Heorot, warriors coming to that hall from faraway lands, princes and leaders of men, hurrying to behold the monster's great staggering tracks. They gaped with no sense of sorrow, felt no regret for his suffering, imagine that, went tracing his bloody footprints, his beaten and lonely flight to the edge of the lake, where he dragged his corpse-like way, doomed and already weary of his vanishing life. The water was bloody, steaming and boiling the horrible pounding waves. Heat sucked from his magic veins, but the swirling surf had covered his death, hidden deep in murky darkness, his miserable end, as hell opened to receive him. In other words, Grendel died. Then old and young rejoiced, turned back from the happy pilgrimage, mounted their hard-hoofed horses, high-spirited stallions, and rode them slowly toward Heorot again, retelling Beowulf's bravery as they jogged along, and over they swore that nowhere on earth, or under the spreading sky, or between the seas, neither south nor north, was there a warrior worthier to rule over men. But no one meant Beowulf's praise to belittle Hrothgar, their kind and gracious king. Notice the parenthetical statement there. Kind of odd because, well, why worry about Hrothgar feeling sad for praising Beowulf? Basically, back then, the king of a tribe was also a warrior. His job was to protect the people. Hrothgar is too old to do that anymore. He's protected them from many things in the past, but now he's getting on in years, needs help. So they want to make sure, Hrothgar, we're very grateful for all the things you have done for us in the past, but Beowulf, woo Beowulf, yay. And so that's where we'll pause with the reading today. Make sure you answer question 10 of the study guide, and that will help you with the exercises this week, as well as the quiz. And to end with another pun, let's see. I have some bad news for you. I don't actually have bad news for you, but they're like wildebeest, but Either way, take care, happy reading, and I'll see you next time. Bye.